Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is March 18th, 2021. This is episode 44. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show. I'll be joined by Sunsara Taylor later on, and we are coming to you from Los Angeles, California. This is a show like no other. We don't mince words. We bring the real deal. We don't peddle illusions or delusions about the system that we live under, the system that has a name: capitalism, imperialism. And this name describes the way that everything people need to live is produced in today's world. This is a dog-eat-dog system, capitalism, imperialism. It destroys lives and it crushes spirits all over the world. And this is a system that has brought humanity to the brink of extinction, where our survival hangs in the balance due to the destruction of the workings of this system on the environment. But look, the world has not always been this way, and it doesn't have to stay this way. This system can't change, but we, the masses of people all over the world, can bring about a radically new and far better system through overthrowing this system. But to do that, we need an actual revolution. That's why the name of our show is Revolution Nothing Less. We take the name of our show from the speech by Bob Avakian, BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less. This is a seminal work that gets into the whole thing, the real deal. What's the system we come out of? What are the situation we face? And what do we need to do about it? Bob Avakian is the most important political leader and thinker today. Why do we say that? It's a big assertion. All the other leaders are working to either brutally shove this system down the throats of the people of the world through one form or another of fascism, or other leaders are trying to make this life-destroying, people-crushing system a little less rough around the edges, and particularly for the better-off people located in the richer countries in the world. But the problem is, the reality is that they and no one can fundamentally change the nature of this system. And there are those who appear more radical, who either seek to repeat the revolutions of the past full stop, or avoid the hard road of revolution and seek to form enclaves of safe cooperative spaces while the system hurtles humanity and the planet into the abyss of devastation and misery. BA is completely different. He is a revolutionary who bases himself on the scientific understanding that this system must finally be overthrown through an organized struggle involving millions of people and replaced with a system that is oriented to and capable of meeting the most fundamental needs of humanity and enabling humanity to become fit caretakers of the earth. Bob Avakian has gone deeply into the revolutions of the 20th century, and he's learned from the broader experiences of humanity and developed the new communism. He's learned from many other sources, academics, artists, scientists, and the masses of people from all over the world. And all of that has contributed to the synthesis, the integration of all of this into what we call the new communism. And here too at the RNL show, we present diverse voices as well and learn from them. But again, all of this is to contribute to the breakthrough of the new communism and the need for revolution to bring that world into being. Bob Avakian has developed the science, a thoroughly and consistently approach to a scientific approach to understanding the world as it actually is. He's developed a strategy to make a revolution here in this country that could be applied all over the world with modifications depending on the country. He's developed the goal of communism, and most importantly, he's developed and written a blueprint for a radically new society that would be on the road to the emancipation of humanity in the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America. Last week I spoke of what Bob Avakian says in his speech, why we need a revolution and how we could really make revolution, the two choices, which are part of a larger strategy for revolution, the 5-2-6. He says, we have two choices. Either live with all this and condemn future generations to the same or worse if they have a future at all, or make revolution, end quote. And this was a controversial statement. We heard back from different people about this. Really? There's only two choices? People in response raised various forms of, well, what about this and what about that? What about this reform and what about that change? There are endless schemes of things that could make the world a little bit better while leaving the fundamental problem that we face in this system intact. And also, it was raised, who are we? Who is BA to say that there's only two choices? Well, some years ago, in a very deep and profound talk, birds cannot give birth to crocodiles, but humanity can soar beyond the horizon, which is a very brilliant title because, of course, birds can't give birth to crocodiles, but what that refers to is the world that we live in is the world that we live in. It evolved, it developed historically, and that's what we have to deal with, not some imagined past or the world we would like to have. It's the world that actually is that we have to deal with and transform. So Bob Avakian spoke to the two ways that society can be organized to meet the needs of humanity at this point in history, a time when there are billions of people in the world with production organized for the things that we need to live on: food, clothing, housing, culture, technology. All of this is integrated into a global system of production with a high degree of technology. So one choice is leaving the world as it is with the capitalist system and the forms of rule to enforce that system. Or two, we make an actual revolution for a radically new world. So in this talk, Birds Cannot Give Birth to Crocodiles, Bob Avakian says this: who are we to say so? We are interpreters of reality. We're scientific investigators and synthesizers of reality. That's who we are. It's reality that says this. And we are those who at this time have come to understand, not through some mystical or religious process, but through applying science that's been developed and is continually being developed. And let me interject here that developing this science is what Bob Avakian has been doing and continues to do. This is why we say we are followers of Bob Avakian, and you should be too, to understand and change the world on that basis. But let me return to the quote. So it's either one or the other, and all the other schemes will lead to one or the other. If they are not consciously striving for the first, they will lead to the second. If they are not consciously striving for a whole radically new and different world, they will lead back to, or be co-opted within, or crushed by the existing old world. You try to carve out a little enclave or ways in which you operate independently of the system, you're either eaten alive and spit out by the system, or you are an insignificant countercurrent for a while to the actual dynamics and prevailing relations of the system, a countercurrent which will sooner or later, in fact, be eaten alive, if not literally crushed politically, just overwhelmed by the dynamics of this system, end quote. These are the two choices, and we here at the RNL Show bring you the what, the why, and the how of the liberating, and yes, hard road of making an actual revolution for a radically new world, and why this is the only choice for the world which we are actively working for here on this show, and the movement for an actual revolution is working for, where all of humanity could flourish and where there would be a planet where humanity could even survive. The focus of our show today has been the focus of all the shows in this second season of the RNL Show is this statement, a New Year's statement by Bob Avakian, a new year, the urgent need for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity. This is a major statement about the period we have just come out of, that Trump-Pence fascist regime in power for 4 years, and more importantly and very decisively, it's the period that we are in right now, and it's a tremendous orientation for how to understand, approach, and work within that period. In this New Year's statement, BA makes the point and makes the case in several different dimensions, quote, that the profound problems confronting humanity cannot be solved. In fact, they can only get worse within the confines of this murderously oppressive and exploitative system, and the chaos and destruction it will continue to unleash on a massive scale so long as it continues to dominate the world. In this statement, Bob Avakian digs beneath the surface to show how the workings of this system has deepened and sharpened the oppression of Black people, of women, and given rise to religious fundamentalism around the world. And all of this has created a situation where we are sitting atop a powder keg. And he poses the question of, will the resolution of these changes be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all such forms of enslavement? Today we are going to delve more deeply into how this statement goes into this around the oppression of black people, and then we're going to talk about one aspect of the oppression of women. Going more deeply into the oppression of black people has a dual purpose. It is a defining question for revolution in this country, and it speaks to a question of this moment, the beginning of the trial of the pig who murdered George Floyd last year, Derek Chauvin. All of us remember the murder of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin. The knee on the neck, 8 minutes, 46 seconds, excruciating, begging for his life. It concentrated the oppression that black people have faced in this country from its inception in slavery, right through the lynchings of Jim Crow down to the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration and police murder, thousands and thousands of black people over the last decades. But this was different. This was so extreme that it ignited a rebellion and it ignited mass protests on a scale not seen before in this country. And this raised profound questions for millions and tens of millions of people in this country of all nationalities about what is the nature of this country? Why has this continued? What does it say about America that it cannot resolve this problem where its police continue to murder people, brutalize people, and where millions of men, women, and children are in prison? Big questions are raised. It's impacted the arts, it's impacted the sciences, it's impacted the universities, and it's impacted people on the streets of this country. How this is going to work out will depend not only, but in part on the outcome of this trial. Will Derek Chauvin be let free, or will he be convicted of second or third degree murder or manslaughter? We don't know how it will turn out. We don't know how these larger questions are going to get resolved in the thinking of people. But a lot of this is going to depend on what people do. And what we here on the RNL show are going to do is go more deeply into this to provide you with the understanding you need to change your own thinking and to act in the world today. And to begin this segment, we're going to be showing you Bob Avakian from the dialogue he had with Cornel West in 2014 in New York City, Revolution and Religion. That's going to bring out sharply for you what a difference this second choice of an actual revolution could make.
Some things can be done right away, just like some things will take a lot longer. As soon as this system is brought down and a new revolutionary system is in place, the police will not go out shooting down the youth in the streets. Right then and there, no more. Now that's a fact. And if somebody is crazed and does do it, they will never be in a position to do it ever again. It will not be this whole process of justifiable homicide. And as I've said before, you will still need forces to protect the security of the people in a new society. Everything is not going to change in one instant. But you can have very different kind of forces protecting the security. Look, quiet as it's kept, we've got security in this room. The church is providing security. Other people are providing security. Is anybody here afraid that they're going to be shot down by the people providing security for this event we're having? I hope not, and I believe not. Why? Because they have a whole different orientation, and they're part of a different process. When you get a whole different system, then as I've said before, if you have there are still going to be people who, have mental problems, go crazy, go off or so. How do you handle that? Let's say we're the people's police going out and you run into a situation like that. Our orientation has to be that we would sooner die ourselves than wantonly kill one of the people, even one, or maybe especially one, who's mentally disturbed. That has to be our orientation.
That's right, that's right. That's
if
right.
you're
That's right. That's right.
If you're part,
That's right.
if you're part of the people's security, if you're part of the people's security that's there to really serve and protect the people, then you put your life on the line, and if you have to, you lay your life down instead of and before you would ever be thinking of brutalizing any of the people. But that is not going to happen under this system, and that's why we got to get rid of this system, and that's why we have to be very serious about the question of, can we have a revolution? And if we can, how do we make that revolution? We have to, look, this is, you know, it's kind of ironic, but, once again, Clyde Young used to say, one of his favorite sayings was, this is serious as a heart attack. And this is very serious. We need humor. We need play. We need joy. But at the same time, that humor, that play, that joy is all part of something that's very, very serious. It is the lives and the future of the masses of people around the world, which is the most precious thing of all to those of us who want and are fighting for a different world. And so we have to proceed in that kind of a way. And that's why I put the emphasis on being scientific, because being scientific just means understanding and working to understand the world the way it really is. It doesn't mean you'll ever understand everything or everything completely correctly. We're always going to make mistakes and have shortcomings, but we have to really strive to understand the world the way it is. And if we do, then we can see where the possibilities actually lie, not because out of wishful thinking, but out of a scientific approach, to know that we actually can have a different kind of world, yes, a different kind of society, and yes, with a different kind of force that really is about protecting and serving the masses of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was Bob Avakian in dialogue with Cornel West from their 2014 dialogue called Revolution and Religion. I'm here with Sunsara Taylor. We're going to dig more deeply into this question.
Yeah, what we want to do next is we're going to bring you an illustrated excerpt from BA's New Year's statement, where he deals with the changing conditions of Black people, but the continued oppression and where this needs to go. And then right after that, we're going to follow it with a conversation I did with two members of the Revolution Club. I'll introduce that after this segment on the statement.
Since the end of World War II 75 years ago, the situation of Black people has dramatically changed. These changes were initially based in increased mechanization and other transformations in agricultural production and the economy overall. They were driven by a powerful upsurge of struggle of Black people, wrenching concessions out of the ruling class in this country that was anxious to maintain its image as the champion of democracy and leader of the free world, especially in its confrontation with the Soviet Union for a number of decades after World War II. As a result of these and other factors, Black people's oppression is no longer centered around brutal exploitation in the rural South, in conditions of near slavery, and in some cases actual slavery, backed up by Ku Klux Klan terror, but instead involves a situation where masses of Black people are segregated and concentrated in urban areas throughout the country and subjected to systematic discrimination and continual brutality and murder by the police. Over the past several decades, due to heightened globalization and automation of production, interacting with continuing discrimination, there has been the elimination of a great deal of factory employment, which provided Black men and some women with better paying jobs in the urban areas. At the same time, as a result of the civil rights and Black liberation struggles of the 1960s, early 70s, and other factors, there has been the growth of the Black middle class. But there has also been an increase of the so-called underclass, concentrated and contained in urban ghettos and more or less permanently locked out of regular employment in the formal economy. Unable to provide a positive resolution to acute contradictions bound up with these changes, unable to end systemic racism, which involves degrading discrimination against even economically better off sections of Black people, unable to integrate large numbers of Black people into the formal economy. The ruling forces in society have responded to this situation with mass incarceration of millions of Black males and growing numbers of females, with arrests, trials, convictions, and sentences embodying yet more discrimination and injustice, and by unleashing and backing systematic police terror, which is especially directed against Black people in the inner cities, but can target any Black person, anywhere, at any time. The attempt to brutally enforce law and order, given that a more just solution is impossible under this system, heightens the volatility of this whole situation, leading to further upheaval, including completely justified and righteous protest and rebellion, which in turn is seized on by fascist forces in promoting their grotesque white supremacist portrayal of the masses of Black people as criminals and uncaged animals. The fact that with all these changes, and regardless of who is occupying the seats of power, systematic discrimination and murderous oppression has persisted, has led some Black people to conclude that the Democratic Party is the problem, since it has consistently sought the support of Black people, but has repeatedly acted against their interests. Even as the Republican Party has become the vehicle of overt and aggressive white supremacy, it is true that the Democrats, and not just the Republicans, have presided over the oppression of Black people. But what is the actual reason for that? And what is the real answer to it? The reality is that white supremacy is built into this system of capitalism imperialism, and neither of these ruling class parties could put an end to this, even if they wanted to. The answer is not rallying to the fascist Republican Party, or trying to play these bourgeois parties against each other, or embracing Black capitalism and begging for a better seat at the table, all of which will only reinforce the existing system of oppression and perhaps benefit a few at the expense of the many. The answer is revolution, and establishing a radically different society that has the basis as well as the orientation to uproot and abolish white supremacy and all oppressive relations.
That was an excerpt from Bob Avakian's New Year's statement. A new year, the urgent need for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity. Now, a lot of what is discussed in that excerpt we just heard is brought to the fore again and is concentrated in a certain way in the trial that is about to begin of the pig Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, and everything that spilled out in society in the beautiful rising that followed that. We want to talk about this some, what's in this statement, and how to understand this in light of the revolution we need to be making, that we are making. And I'm very happy to be joined here in studio today on the Revolution Nothing Less show by Noche Diaz and Lucha Bright. They're both members of the Revolution Club and the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution Tour. Welcome, Noche.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Sonny.
Welcome, Lucha.
Glad to be with you.
All right, so listen, I wanted to take us back to a particular part of the excerpt that we just heard from BA's New Year's statement, where he writes, unable to provide a positive resolution to acute contradictions bound up with these changes. He's referencing the changes in the position of Black people under this system that he just walked through. Unable to end systemic racism, which involves degrading discrimination against even economically better off sections of Black people, unable to integrate large numbers of Black people into the, quote, formal economy. The ruling forces in society have responded to this situation with mass incarceration of millions of Black males and growing numbers of females, with arrests, trials, and convictions and sentences embodying yet more discrimination and injustice, and by unleashing and backing systematic police terror, which is especially directed at against Black people in the inner cities but can target any black person, anywhere, at any time. Noche, I want to ask you to take us back to last summer, to when George Floyd was murdered, to the beautiful rising that followed, and what was concentrated in that? What was reflected in the strength of that, including in light of what's being described here about what the system has been unable to do in relation to ending the oppression of black people?
Yeah. So, I mean, here we are. People should be watching this trial because going back to what happened with George Floyd, everybody saw 8.5 minutes, this man being, kept face down with that pig's knee on his neck. And all of what you just read from and described was like, getting concentrated like right there. And not everybody knew it at the time. But for some people, this has gone on too much. I can't breathe that came out of George Floyd's mouth was how many people were feeling when they saw that. And some people were just like, I don't want to be part of a society that does that, and I can't let that go on. Right. And so here you had a situation where not only was it like sickening to watch, but George Floyd was like, it was also Eric Garner. It was also Breonna Taylor. It was also, on and on and on, the names that you can't even name because of how many there have been and continued to be afterwards. And, it's because of what's described in that part you read from Avakian, that this is not just what was in the heart and mind of that one cop and what his knee was doing. This was kind of what it felt like America was doing to black people. And this began to be how people were even questioning things in the midst of the beautiful uprising that followed the murder of George Floyd. I mean, people were looking at all these statues of slave owners who founded this country, Confederate generals who fought to maintain slavery in a civil war, and saying, why are these the statues that are up? Why are these the names that are on institutions? What country is this? Okay, it's people who had blinders ripped off for a minute. There were all these white people out there in the street standing with black people saying, an end to institutional racism. This is kind of like what started to get opened up. Not that everybody knew what Avakian is describing. In fact, that's part of why, we're here talking about it, because this is what, but this is what underneath it, underneath the surface of what people were feeling and seeing, in that,
Lucha, you want to add any thoughts on this? I know you were out there in the front lines together with Noche and many others in this upsurge against the murder of George Floyd and everything else it concentrated. But you've been on this fight for the revolution, but also on the front lines of the fight against police murder and terror and the ways that this system has oppressed and subjugated black people in many different ways. I think it'd be helpful to bring some of that in.
Yeah, well, the uprising in the summer was tremendously uplifting when people came out into the streets in the way Noche was describing. But I came out to Los Angeles in 1992 when I was 15 years old after a rebellion then that shook the whole society and world after Rodney King was beaten. It was caught on video. Everybody thought, now we're going to get some justice. And there was no justice. And people rose up very powerfully. And we are now almost 30 years later, and the murders by police have gone on unabated. The terror against black people has gone on unabated. And all the ways that people keep hoping that things are gonna, this reform, that defund the police, this, all the different ways people think this is gonna be worked out, keeps not being worked out because this system has white supremacy in its very functioning, which we saw in that segment we just watched together. This is how this whole country has always worked and how this system has developed and continues to terrorize people.
Look, what you're describing about the LA rebellion, which was nearly 30 years ago, and I know, Noche, you were in Ferguson during that uprising after the killing of Michael Brown and Eric Garner that swept the country. And then this uprising was even more powerful. I think, though, that we have to discuss, and it brings to light the pattern described in this statement from BA, where he writes, the attempt to brutally enforce law and order, given that a more just solution is impossible under this system, heightens the volatility of this whole situation, leading to further upheaval, including completely justified and righteous protest and rebellion, which in turn is seized on by fascist forces in promoting their grotesque white supremacist portrayal of masses of Black people as, quote, criminals and, quote, uncaged animals. And we've seen that as well in extraordinarily vivid and vicious ways since this uprising. Noche, you want to talk some about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, it has to be said, in the face of the LA rebellion and what happened in Ferguson, you would think any just society would say we have to change all of this. But, like it's pointed to there, they just cannot, like you were walking through. And here we saw again, right? Every mayor of every city that was exploding in rebellion, had to figure out how to put it down. And then you had these fascist forces, that's described here, Trump and his tens of millions of people who actually look to him as representing everything that they're about, coming with their more open viciousness and terror. Okay, we can cite lots of examples, but let's just face it, the whole program that they had for him running for president was law and order. Let's, put all of this down and restore, American greatness, which was brought right together with all this white supremacy. And you could see how this slow genocide of police murder and mass incarceration that has been going on under both parties for decades, you could see who would want to and who could actually bring this to a fast genocide, which is where things have gone. And, the righteousness of the rebellions against that, but why we have to actually get at what's underlying, driving this and what needs to really go, which is this whole system.
Look, I think that's important. And I know you said you could give many examples could be given. I wonder, Lucha, if there's any examples that strike you as particularly poignant to bring this alive.
Well, there was a whole clampdown after the beautiful rising that was an official clampdown, and there was a way in which the white supremacy that's being built up, in a whole force was unleashed, and you saw it in Kenosha. You saw it when Jacob Blake was shot, and then these, Trump called on the white supremacists to come out and take care of this and of the people, not take care of Black people being shot by the police, take care of the fact that people were standing up against that. And, when BA talks about this as uncaged animals, that was the exact kind of language these people were using. And you had this guy come out and shoot and kill 2 people in Kenosha, and then was upheld as a hero by that whole movement that ended up, going in and storming the Capitol in January and celebrating that murderer, that white supremacist murderer, as a hero of that whole movement. So this is the volatility you see of a system that is locking people in this position, carrying out this brutality, has no answer to it. People are driven to rise up against it, and then the only answer that comes back is either the Democrats with their coming out of both sides of their mouth, we're going to do this for you while we send out the National Guard, or the straight up brutality of the fascists and a whole fascist white supremacist movement that's been built up and been given impetus to by these very contradictions.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's brought us to this moment where those fascists are no longer in power. But like BA says in this statement, we've bought some time, but time is not on the side of the struggle for a better future for humanity. And we've got to get to work on what can actually bring about a resolution to this that is in the interest of humanity. Noche, do you want to close out with any comments about that?
Absolutely. There's another side to the volatility that he talks about. There's the dangers of things getting worse and going to ugly extremes. There's also the potential that you saw in those millions of people who came out and came together. But right now, a lot of that potential is locked up and trapped because people are caught within the choices of this system and rallying behind solutions within this system that do not solve any of the fundamental problems that Bob Avakian talks to. And that volatility also points to part of why we can actually bring out a whole different solution, a whole different, polarization. We're in society. Bob Avakian, this leadership, this revolution that he is leading that could bring into being a whole new society that could end all of this, could actually not just spark the hopes again, but ground those hopes in a scientific understanding of how things could be different. You know, we could get to a society that doesn't need to cast off and put down whole sections of people that they can't profitably exploit, but that can unleash people to change everything and eradicate the history of white supremacy in this country and put people to work to build a beautiful future for humanity that this system cannot do.
All right, well, listen, I want to encourage people to go back to the statement in its entirety on revcom.us, and we're going to continue to be talking about this whole situation, including as the trial of Derek Chauvin plays out. But right now, I want to thank both of you for coming on and talking with us here today.
Thank you for having us. This has been really important.
Thanks. This is great.
So thank you, Sunsara, for that conversation with members of the Revolution Club. Next, to cap off this segment that's dealing with the oppression of Black people and revolution, we want to show you a segment from the series we're doing based on the article that's on revcom.us, Bob Avakian for the Liberation of Black People and the Emancipation of All Humanity. And what we've been doing with the Revolution Nothing Less show is illustrating this entire piece, walking our way through it. We've done 2 sections so far. But today what we're going to do is show you what is the conclusion of that article, because it is so relevant to what we just showed you, and it's something that we want to be taking out into the streets and putting up on social media. And when we're done with illustrating the whole series of BA for the Liberation of Black People and the Emancipation of All Humanity, we're going to put this together as a continuous film. So let's just go now to this last video installment of the article, BA for the Liberation of Black People and the Emancipation of All Humanity.
From his early years forging close personal ties with Black people and increasingly learning about their lived experience, to his development as this rare leader who has brought forth the most advanced scientific revolutionary theory with the new communism, a defining part of the life and work of Bob Avakian has been the liberation of Black people from centuries of oppression, and the understanding of how this relates to, and is a crucial driving force in, the communist revolution to finally abolish every form of oppression and exploitation everywhere. B.A. himself has expressed this in the following poetically powerful statement.
There is the potential for something of unprecedented beauty to arise out of unspeakable ugliness. Black people playing a crucial role in putting an end, at long last, to this system which has, for so long, not just exploited, but dehumanized, terrorized, and tormented them in 1,000 ways. Putting an end to this in the only way it can be done, by fighting to emancipate humanity, to put an end to the long night in which human society has been divided into masters and slaves, and the masses of humanity have been lashed, beaten, raped, slaughtered, shackled, and shrouded in ignorance and misery.
Next, we want to share with you an excerpt of an interview I did originally on radio with Ruchira Gupta. She's a reporter who's covered extensively the rise of sex trafficking and enslavement of women and girls in the brothels of India. This is one concentration of the patriarchy and domination and degradation that stalks women the world over. And in this interview, we're going to jump into the middle of it, where I have just asked her to describe how she first began reporting on this. So that's where she picks up in telling this story.
I pushed off to Nepal to just go trekking into the hills and do stories on the environment and be by myself. And when I was doing that, I stumbled upon rows of villages which didn't have any girls from age 15 to 45. And I asked the villagers where the girls were. And they said they all are in Bombay. And that was quite surprising to me because I couldn't understand how so many girls from these remote villages could be 1,400 kilometers away. So I began to follow the trail as a good journalist, and I found that a smooth supply chain existed from these villages to the brothels of Bombay. And there was like a trafficker, a recruiter, a transporter, a corrupt border guard, a pimp, a brothel manager, a sex buyer, and organized crime, all running this very, very easily and preying upon little girls between the ages of 9 and 13, daughters of poor farmers who had simply no idea what was going on. So I ended up making a documentary on the subject, and that documentary is called The Selling of Innocence. I won an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for that. I saw violence by organized crime who were preying on little girls and selling them like fresh meat to people for multiple rapes in the brothels of Bombay. And all of it was normalized. There was nothing wrong with it. Like 50-year-old men would come and rape a 10-year-old girl and go away. And some of these girls were even kept in cages in those days, on display for men.
I did watch that film. I know it was made several decades ago now. It's very wrenching. You sit down with an indebted young man whose family has died, and he's inherited debt from his parents. It's cycled down. And he ends up being conned into selling his sisters out of desperation. And he thinks he's getting his sister contracted into a factory, perhaps, or into a home as a servant. But this is a lot of how it happens. That's one experience. You do a lot of up close with the young girls. I wonder if you could just share, if you haven't seen it, if you live remote from it, bring it alive to people. I know you can't show the film right now, but tell us a couple of stories.
You know, one story is, of course, as you mentioned, of this young boy. His parents were migrant workers who'd gone away to India to work. He was basically bringing himself up and his sister. His sister had disappeared and possibly been sold, and he had played a role in introducing her to the man he thought took her away. And he regretted it all his life, but he himself had such a precarious existence that he could never go looking for the trafficker. He missed his sister, but he didn't know how to find her. And, the part 2 of the story, which is not in the movie, but very recently, about 10 years ago, that boy has actually committed suicide. So he's not even living anymore. The farmers who let their daughters go, a lot of times people ask me that, oh, what kind of father is that who let his daughter go? But first of all, the farmer had no idea what Bombay was. To them, Bombay just represented a lifestyle which they saw on TV. So it was like, there's glamour with high rises and cars and, what they saw in Hindi movies, really. And the second thing was that they were starving. They had literally, the crop would fail, the roof would be leaking, and they had 4 children, all starving. They thought, okay, if we let one daughter go to work, then the other 3 will survive. And they literally used to believe that at least she'll have food and a roof over her head in Bombay. So, to blame a farmer who himself is so oppressed is kind of strange without, any structural changes being done for them. And the other stories I remember while filming,
also
there was something
of what happens when the girls arrive. What is the life like in these brothels?
So when the girls arrive, when the girls are brought to the brothels, the pimps are waiting for them. And this transporter goes there and offers this 9 to 13-year-old to the pimp. And he decides the price of this girl depending on her beauty and age. By beauty, I mean the younger, the better. The youngest I have met is a 7-year-old. The other qualities they look for is if she's fair-skinned. That's very much sought after by the sex buyers. And then they hand them over to these brothel managers who then sell them for 30 cents a night for each rape. And Many of these men are very violent with these girls. They stub cigarette butts out on them, shove bottles up their vagina, beatings, fractures are common over there. Insomnia, of course, is very common because the girls have to be available at any time for the customers who come. And they are locked up in small rooms with iron bars on the window, where they have to basically be available for the customers one after another, one after another. And in 5 years, their body is completely consumed. And then they're thrown out on the streets and told you can do what you like. And, basically the trajectory of a woman who's prostituted is, first she's kept as a bonded slave. And then by the time she's told she can keep half of what she earns or all of what she earns, her body is so disease-ridden and she's so traumatized that her earnings go down, and her old age pension is really disease and death. Mortality rates are high in prostitution. And I deliberately use the term because of what I saw in the brothels. I deliberately do not use the term sex worker, but I use the term prostituted woman or prostituted child because I believe that it is these structural circumstances of poverty, inequality, class, and caste, which have been created by corporate capital and other kinds of ways, which keep her there. And prostitution is a system. And it takes advantage of the vulnerabilities of individuals, either of the circumstances of individual vulnerabilities if she's a child and she can't take decisions on her own.
Can you say something that helps convey the scale on which this is taking place?
So in India, the last time they did a count was, they said 3 million. And 3 million can only be the tip of the iceberg. And the average age of a girl being sold into prostitution is between 9 and 13. Mm. And this is across the world. And according to the United Nations Office for Drug and Crime, on any given year, there are 27 million people who are trapped. And then the numbers keep changing from 27 million to 150 million. Also, the UN has said and evaluated that it's the second largest organized crime in the world. The buying and selling of human beings or human trafficking. It follows the arms trade and has surpassed the drug trade. Because drugs you can consume once, but children you can consume again and again and again.
It's important for people to know that in the 1990s, there was a liberating and inspiring revolution taking place in Nepal. A Maoist people's war centered in the rural villages, aiming to set up a revolutionary society up against the whole history of imperialist domination and feudalism. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, that revolution got taken off course, and the hopes that had been raised were dashed, the advances that were made were set back. But while it was going on, ending the scourge that Gupta spoke about, along with the all-around oppression of women, was one of the central aims of that revolution, as well as lifting the weight of imperialism, which was a driving force coming together with patriarchy that drove so many to sell their daughters or in other ways get driven into the brothels. And the force with which women surged to the front lines of that revolution is a testament to this, as well as to the fact that of what BA has spoken to repeatedly, that the fight to break the chains on women is and must be a driving force in the revolutionary struggle to emancipate humanity. All revolutions run into new challenges. And a critical lesson to draw from this is that what is most decisive is political line. That is your understanding of the problem you're setting out to solve and the path to solve that problem, and having a thoroughly scientific method and approach, and continuing to apply that in the face of new challenges. This is what humanity needs if the masses of people are going to get free. So finally, to close out our show today, we want to bring you a segment that shows how sharply posed, how explosive this question of the role of women and the future that women will face worldwide is today, and what is needed.
In his New Year's statement, A New Year, the Urgent Need for a Radically New World for the Emancipation of All Humanity, Bob Avakian said, "The whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all forms of such enslavement? A powder keg in the U.S. and around the world. On International Women's Day this year, thousands filled the streets in Colombia, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, Algeria, Poland. There were demonstrations in almost every state of Mexico. The Revolutionary Communist Organization in Mexico said, everywhere, fed up, outraged, and furious women demanded an end to femicide, sexual violence, enforced disappearances, harassment, beatings, and degradation against women, all products of this patriarchal and capitalist system. They also demanded the right to legal abortion. In Mexico City, the protests were met with tear gas, fire extinguishers, and barriers, which did not stop the defiance and determination of the protesters. Just this week, thousands filled the streets of London and cities across England in mourning and protest of the murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everard. Sarah was walking home from a friend's in South London on the evening of March 3rd when she disappeared. Her body was found several days later, and a member of the elite police unit that protects diplomats and parliamentarians was arrested and charged with her abduction and murder. Protests have been met with arrests and brutality. Tens of thousands marched in cities across Australia, demanding an end to the violence against women. In Iran, women and men are facing a new wave of repression and brutality in the Islamic Republic of Iran's prisons and torture chambers. One driving force of this is an attempt to forcibly suppress the rebellion of women against the forced hijab and Islamic fundamentalist patriarchal control. Abortion is outlawed in El Salvador, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Women face years in prison for abortion, and many are charged with murder, even in cases of miscarriage. Protests in Myanmar, in Burma, against a military coup are entwined with a struggle against patriarchy, against a military force that regularly uses rape as a weapon of war and genocide.
Moim zdaniem ten protest to jest też wyraz takiej bezsilności, w sensie takiej, nawet nie bezsilności, tylko takiego dosyć mam tego.
Billions of women are straining against the chains of male supremacy woven into every fiber of this system of capitalism imperialism. But where will this outrage, unrest, and volatility go? Will there be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution to this? The answer depends on us. In The New Communism, Bob Avakian said, "There's an urgent need for this new synthesis of communism to be taken up broadly, in this society and in the world as a whole. Everywhere, people are questioning why things are the way they are and whether a different world is possible. Everywhere, people are talking about revolution, but have no real understanding of what revolution means. No scientific approach to analyzing and dealing with what they're up against and what needs to be done. Everywhere, people are rising up in rebellion, but are hemmed in, let down, and left to the mercy of murderous oppressors, or misled onto paths which only reinforce, often with barbaric brutality, the enslaving chains of tradition. Everywhere, people need a way out of their desperate conditions, but do not see the source of their suffering and the path forward out of the darkness. Break the chains and unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution."